Good morning, everybody. May I take the opportunity to say to Maria and to her organising committee, thank you for allowing me to participate in this conference. Notwithstanding the near final assault to which it has recently been subjected by technology, the bookshop has yet managed to cling to existence. And here and there, we can still find a biography section with its enticing volumes on Barack Obama, Maria Sharapova, and Oprah Winfrey. If we pause to peruse their pages, we might well receive the impression that biography is merely a handmaiden of the cult of personality, for in much of it we find ourselves far removed from the resolve of James Boswell, who set about writing his life of Samuel Johnson, determined to avoid all panegyric and to reflect finally on the life itself. But then, what is the life? Over against what we might generally find in the bookstore, the finest literary biography transcends not only public reputation, but even individuality, and locates its subject first within a localised society, but then, more fundamentally, within the unfolding human drama, and seeks out the contribution that subject makes to that ongoing development. In what follows, we shall seek to observe how that high objective finds expression in Jonathan Cott's 1991 biography of Lafcadio Hearn, which he entitled Wandering Ghost, and the posthumously published autobiographical novel Report to Greco, written by Nikos Kazantzakis. It should come as no surprise that both our chosen subjects were born within the parameters of what is now the Greek nation. Greece has its roots in the life of the mind, rather than in the events of the passing day that constitutes history. Western civilization rests on the questions formulated in the sophistication of Greek curiosity and constructs its answers on the foundations laid by the ancient Greek philosophers. Hearn and Kazantzakis, as we shall argue, may well address universal human concerns, but it remains the case that they both speak out of a Grecian engagement with matters of the mind, and indeed, even more significantly, with matters of the spirit. Hearn is probably lesser known than Kazantzakis, so let me make a few comments about his background. He was born in the Ionian island of Lafcadio, and of course his name derives from the place of his birth. As an infant, he lost contact with his father, who was a surgeon in the British Army, and who was transferred to another island. As a consequence of the transfer, his mother took him to Ireland, where he spent time living with his grandmother. He refused to embrace the Catholicism of the Irish family, and as a consequence, he was banished to England, where he spent time in the East End of London, roaming the streets, or alternately spending time in the British Museum, reading voraciously. Eventually, his aunt, who was looking after him in England, received money from Ireland with which a one-way ticket was bought for Lafcadio, and he found himself eventually in the United States. There, he lived in stables and survived on penurious earnings from labouring jobs. Eventually, he was able to come into contact with an English newspaper columnist, and this friendship led to his being appointed to the Cincinnati Daily Enquirer as a crime reporter. He contracted a marriage to a woman named Alethea Foley, which ended in divorce after a mere 3 years. Following the divorce, Hearn moved to New Orleans, where he wrote for several newspapers, but began to branch out into book reviews and editorial pieces on esoteric subjects such as various Eastern religions, including Buddhism and the Hindu culture of the Vedas scriptures. Working with the Times Democratic newspaper, he translated works from the French and Spanish. Such was the impact of his journalism that he is regarded by many as having put New Orleans on the cultural map of the United States. Many of his pieces were collected and published under the title Inventing New Orleans. It was during this period that he established an international reputation as a writer of the macabre after the fashion of Edgar Allan Poe. New Orleans, however, could not hold him. Harper's Magazine commissioned him to Martinique in the French West Indies, where he produced 2 volumes based on the local lifestyle. But it was in 1890 that he made the move that ensured his lasting fame, when he crossed the Pacific to Japan, married a Japanese woman named Kumuzai Setsu, took up a position at Tokyo University, and won the hearts and minds of his new compatriots through his explication and promotion of their culture to the Western world. Hearn observed his new neighbours closely and wrote that, quote, "To divert oneself seems indeed the main purpose of Japanese existence, beginning with the opening of the baby's wondering eyes. The faces of the people have an indescribable look of patient expectancy, the air of waiting for something interesting to make its appearance. If it failed to appear, they would travel to find it." End quote. Following this observation, Hearn came to the realization that he himself had, in his own words, become so accustomed to surprises, to interesting or extraordinary sights, that when a day happens to pass during which nothing remarkable has been seen or heard, I feel vaguely disappointed. But such blank days, he added, are rare. This expectancy, of which he writes, may be understood as an openness, a freedom from spiritual myopia, a capacity not merely to anticipate, but to embrace the new. It rests on an inner conviction that there is always more experience to be encountered, more reality to be realized. This notion of more led Hearn to reflect on the relationship man has with time, and he came to see that in the most profound sense, man transcends time, and that when the individual perceives this, life takes on an entirely new dimension, the perspective of eternity. By way of example, Hearn points to the anxiety faced by the individual when confronted with the inevitability of his own demise. The anxiety arises, suggests Hearn, not from the fact of death, but from the confused assumption that life is defined by form rather than by essence. Forms appear and vanish in perpetual succession, he writes, but the essence alone is real. Nothing real can be lost, even in the dissipation of 1,000,000 universes. Utter destruction, everlasting death, all such terms of fear have no correspondence to any truth but the eternal law of change. Even forms can perish only as waves pass and break. They melt but to swell anew. Nothing can be lost. His understanding that essence takes precedence over form enables him to write, "The light of the mother's smile will survive our sun. The thrill of her kiss will last beyond the thrilling of stars. The sweetness of her lullaby will endure in the cradle song of worlds yet unevolved. The tenderness of her faith will quicken the fervour of prayers to be made to the hosts of another heaven, to the gods of a time beyond time. And the nectar of her breast can never fail. The snowy stream will still flow on to nourish the life of some humanity more perfect than our own, when the Milky Way that spans our night shall have vanished forever out of space." Finally, and prophetically, he is emphatic. "I am an individual I? Nay, I am a population unthinkable for multitude, even by groups of 1,000 millions. Generation of generations I am, eons of eons. Countless times the concourse now making me has been scattered and mixed with other scatterings. Of what concern then the next disintegration? Perhaps after trillions of ages of burning in different dynasties of suns, the very best of me may yet come together." If Lafcadio Hearn invites us to be open to life's unfolding drama, the Cretan writer, Nikos Kazantzakis, also challenges us to extend our horizon. In his magnificent written account of his life's work, he draws our attention to the inner eye and suggests that even if we cannot change the world, we can at least change the way in which we look upon it, seeing it through a particular existential filter that he calls the Cretan glance. In his most simple explanation of the Cretan glance, Kazantzakis points to the location of Crete at the hub of the Orient, the Occident, and the African continent. The glance is more than a visual capacity. It is a piercing of space. It is a taking in of what lies beyond regional boundaries. But as such, it becomes more. It is a penetration of foreign cultures, a recognition of the ultimate insignificance of those superficial differences that camouflage the essential characteristics that identify universal man. At its core, the Cretan glance is best understood as a method of synthesis, a means of bringing into concord all contrarieties. It enables all antithetical concepts, notions, and theories to meld into a spiritual unity that locates everything within a cohesive yet perpetually expanding reality. It transforms the manner in which we relate to spaces, persons, and things. It is an affirmation of Martin Buber's dictum that all real life is meeting, and it acknowledges the profound significance of every last vestige of our every encounter throughout the whole of our existence. Consider the manner of Kazantzakis' own seeing. In terms of place, he penetrated the heart of a locale and drew from it its essence and its significance. From his native island, Crete, he extracted the historic myths and fervent energy that manifested the struggle for freedom. In Assisi, in Italy, he assimilated the spiritual affinity between Brother Francis and the luxuriant world. In Spain, he encompassed the edifying product of an aspiring art. In Russia, he incorporated the cost of envisaging and seeking to create a new social order. And in Berlin, he drew on the creative power of a steeled discipline and an unwavering resolve. And as with place, so with interpersonal relations. He does not simply meet other individuals, he encounters them in the core of his being. In his intellectual interaction with Homer, he attained what he described as the eye of the sun with its encompassing vision. Buddha reveals to him the depth of the world and man's struggle for enlightenment. Through his classroom discourse with Henri Bergson, he found the answer to the questions that had plagued his youthful mind, while his reading of Nietzsche armed him with the strong resolve to conflict anguish and misfortune. Alexis Zorba, he tells us, simply taught him to love life and stand steadfast in the face of death. For Kazantzakis, other people, seen through the lens of the Cretan glance, were agencies of his own development and of the species' advancement. The Cretan glance, an amalgam of seeing and meaning, transmutes the physical and personal world into a spiritual realm in which the real no longer shimmers as a mirage on some distant horizon, but burnishes the immediate air with its bristling intensity. Thus utilized, it becomes more than a simple mechanism for seeing. It becomes a mode of being in which life, in its boundless energy, pulses through every fibre of the body and mind, constantly refashioning the human, keeping it compliant with its essential nature as a creative force. In his still highly significant 1974 study, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, Robert M. Percy contended that, and I quote, "Man is not the source of all things, as the subjective idealists would say, nor is he the passive observer of all things, as the objective idealists and materialists would say. He is a participant in the creation of all things." End quote. Man's authentic connectedness to the world gives rise to what Percy calls quality, which is, by its very nature, creative. Percy understands this quality as being what the Greek philosophers named arete, and it may be that it is the perennial next step in the creative urge of the cosmos. Man's ascent is a constant reaching after what is better. Thus, Hearn and Kazantzakis combine to teach us that when man thinks and lives sub specie eternitatis rather than sub specie temporis, and when he opens himself to the universe with its abundant variety and richness, not only does he enable a refinement of his spirit, but he couples himself to the onrushing upward spiral of the prodigious life force. Thank you.